All right, I am starting right from the top. Actually, I will play. I think we'll see something. No, that's not the one. Ah, yes. Okay, I will play another one of these little videos. So I've been checking out this Notebook LM, and it seems like it does better when you give it less of the specific um, like it can take stuff out of the whole book, but if you force it to focus on the specific chapters you want, it gives you a little bit more um, of a useful video. So I'm going to put this here and play it. And this is the first time I'm seeing it, so this will be an exciting experience for everybody. Seems that the audio is not playing, from what I can tell. I don't know why that is. It seems that the audio is not playing, from what I can tell. Oh. I don't know why that's my phone where I'm testing the stream. So mute that. Mm. Can anyone hear the video audio playing? Leave a comment if you can. Let me just do this. No, that's not gonna work. So there is audio, but you can't hear it. So that's annoying. I'll figure out the settings for that. All right. Well, all right. Well, it appears that the audio for the video does not play or is not playing correctly. I don't know why. I'm sure it's some setting that's. You know what? I wonder maybe I can try something else if I download it. Mhm. Can I just put in a whole thing? Oh, okay. Let's see. It's sort of working. A thing is spinning. Anyway, so I figured out that if I make videos just of the specific chapters that I want, it stays like more on focus. But I have to upload separate PDFs to do that, because if I tell it, if it just has the one PDF of the whole book, it'll kind of give me what I want, but then it pulls stuff from the whole book, which is kind of cool because it means that, the ideas are somewhat integrated, but it wasn't really giving me the thing I want. Oh well, okay, well that's uploading, so I'll forget that. And I'll just go ahead to start reading this chapter. I've read a couple of these chapters off stage. This is the last one in this story section. I think it's a little shorter. Yeah. Okay. Chapter 34, Starships, Myths and Stories, Part 6. I do believe that his search, I guess this needs background. Oh, shoot. You know what? I'm not going to do this one because it really is connected to the previous one. So I'll read a different chapter instead. Okay. Architecture. We'll do this instead. Chapter 35, Architecture. Why castles are greater than cathedrals. The castle is greater than the cathedral. This is something young children know. A cathedral is something that brings awe to the initiated, but it does not speak to ignorance. Its cruciform shape is imperceptible from the ground. Its flying buttresses form an alien exoskeleton reminiscent of the arched legs of locusts, and the gargoyles meant to ward off evil do the same for the strangers in our midst. The historian will protest that none of these things were slightly foreign to the peasants of the Middle Ages, but that's besides the point. The symbolic language of cathedral architecture is a dead one, just like the Latin spoken within its walls, foreign to the denizens of our age. The castle lives on, and every child knows it as the home of a king. But it's not just the lasting popularity that makes the castle greater than the cathedral. It's because it offers a more complete image of the cosmos. After all, there are chapels inside castles. The sacraments and liturgy are present in both, and while the scale of the Mass performed is reduced, the diversity of life within the castle more than makes up for the difference. The liminal space of the cathedral threshold fixes a hard line between the heavenly realm inside and the worldly decay outside. Only the baptized may enter, and only the clergy can approach the innermost areas. You can look at your feet and determine your eternal status, but the chapel within the castle does something completely different. The dividing line between the saved and the lost is not found at the chapel door, but at the outermost gates of the castle. The chapel is an indwelling presence that sanctifies the whole of the castle, like leavening working through 3 measures of flour. The castle is a fractal of nested arenas, the motte and bailey, the courtyard and the keep, and the sacred dwellings within both. Both the chapel and the chamber of the Lord and Lady reside within the keep, 2 most holy places where people are born and born again. And the great hall serves as a holy place, where life-giving supper is shared between all who reside within the walls. The castle is a microcosm of the whole world, an island surrounded by the waters of chaos, a moat deadly to friend and foe alike. Its outer curtain, as the walls are known, are like the ring of mountains that form the land of Eden, with which within its inner curtain lies the keep, the holy mountain at the center, and within those walls the sacred temple and the marriage tent. The castle is a place of work. The sons of Lamech and the sons of Noah work together in harmony, the herdsmen and musicians of Jabal and Jubal, the smiths of Tubal-Cain, the stonemasons, carpenters, and soldiers of Ham, Shem, and Japheth. When times are peaceful, the work of cultivation spills over beyond the walls and rivers that surround this little paradise. her sheep and cattle wandering across 1,000 amber hills. The orchards are fruitful, and the villages multiply, filling the whole earth. It is also a place of life, a place with food for the hungry and drink for the thirsty. The spinning wheel and loom clothe the naked. The wandering stranger is welcomed in, the widow and the fatherless, the loathly lady and the lame beggar. Not only the poor, but the foreigner, as lords forge bonds of peace with neighbors by marrying ladies from distant lands. There are even prisoners to be visited within the castle, locked in keeps and dungeons, but treated with fairness. When trouble comes through plagues, wars, famine, or other tragedies, the bridges are lifted and the gates are closed. The castle becomes an ark of stone, protecting the seeds of a future generation until after the floodwaters recede. There may not have been a single castle where all the chivalric ideals were fulfilled, but it is the pattern and form of our idealized imaginations. Like St. John's final visions, the castle of our dreams is made in the image of the New Jerusalem, the gleaming white walls of Minas Tirith, Camelot, and Cair Paravel, with gates wide open, the nations streaming in to pay tribute and honor to kings and queens. Lungs to sing and language to speak. I don't want to criticize the cathedral too harshly, because they are truly magnificent structures, but there is a strange fetishization of the cathedral among advocates for the return to tradition. I have stood in Notre Dame before it was damaged by fire, and St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City, and many smaller churches with beautiful and traditional architecture. As a builder and a craftsman, I am often impressed with the details. But such beautiful buildings do not inspire wonder in me the way others say they should, at least not when they are still. A cathedral is a space designed to be inhabited by a spirit, by wind, by breath. The light of the stained glass windows can set a wonderful mood, but it's the lungs of a church that bring it to life. Churches have always been filled with the breath of spirit-filled worshipers, singing and chanting psalms and songs, but the building itself had no voice. It was the Germans who first made the lungs a feature of architecture, along with the throats and mouths and vocal cords, in the form of great pipe organs that were integral and permanent parts of the building. The development of these voices and lungs follows an anthropomorphic trend in building design. The cruciform shape of cathedrals pointed to the shape of Christ's body on the cross, but tradition and ideals have kept churches from evolving in the same way that many other structures did. Tradition restrains the impulse to change in regards to form and material. This means that the hierarchy of greatness among cathedrals is measured in terms of bigger, taller, wider, and shinier, more gold, more glass, and better paintings and bigger sculptures. As for ideals, the ethereal and otherworldly set the tone. The classic cathedral was meant to reflect a heavenly vision, but that vision required a certain cultural context to be fully understood. The ascent to the cathedral was the final step in a journey to a city that was laid out and ordered according to certain principles. Those cities were in turn situated in a particular relationship with the surrounding towns, villages, and countryside. As those contexts began to change, much of the cultural significance and meaning of the cathedral began to fade. Cathedrals are still being constructed, and there should always be a place for the church to meet in the density of urban populations. But if new cathedrals are to be filled with living spirits, they must integrate and reflect the constantly changing nature of culture. In many ways, though not always, the suburban megachurches are the new cathedrals, as the centers of genuine religious movements and the places where songs are loudly sung. Their architecture reflects the sensibilities of the culture in which they exist, which is more utilitarian than aesthetic. This reduced focus on aesthetic beauty has been greatly lamented, but the contrast between these different eras and their cathedrals serve to mark the passage of time. When we look at the gradual changes from century to century, we can see the reflections of the changing culture. Rather than juxtaposing the oldest and the newest buildings, studying their progression across time and space reveals an ongoing conversation between the institutional church and the broader culture. This conversation takes place in what Christopher Alexander calls a pattern language. This is a series of motifs in design and construction that are repeated in different scales. Each cathedral represents its own unique pattern language, but also shares much in common with others. Much like other languages, the closer two buildings are in time and space, the more they will have in common. Spanish and Italian are closer, while there are fainter hints of commonality between Spanish and English. These pattern languages can slowly begin to incorporate innovations, and if done correctly, keep the heart and soul of the classic style. The greatest current example of this is La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, a masterpiece of architecture that blends the best parts of modern techniques and materials in truly new and innovative ways, while still preserving the DNA of the classic cathedrals. Anthropomorphic buildings. While the desire for beauty is admirable, when we disassociate the historical and traditional from our conceptions of these buildings, we can observe some strange details. The rows of external buttresses borrow more from the insectile than the incarnational. The brittle shells of stone and glass are closer to a beetle's body than the Virgin's womb. As was mentioned regarding the pyramids, we tend to think of stone as permanent and flesh as temporary, but it's really the other way around. The stones are just artifacts of people who are no more. We are more closely connected to the builders and inhabitants of the cathedrals than the pyramids, but the age of the cathedral, as it had been known, is almost certainly over. This does not mean we should simply accept that all future churches will be housed in beige steel boxes. Instead, we should start fresh with our understanding of what a cathedral is meant to communicate and craft a new pattern language based on our new understanding of nature and humanity. The first point of consideration is the cruciform shape of the building. A wooden cross was quite sufficient to hold the dying body of Christ, but wood has been seen as too low a substance to house his body in its baked and fermented forms. Despite its significant use in the Ark, the tabernacle, and both the first temple and forest palace of King Solomon, the construction of churches in the West has been dominated by brick and stone. Wood is an organic substance, sustainable and abundant. It also plays a significant role in the story of Scripture. Trees are at the center of the garden. The tree grows from the same substance as human beings and represents humanity in many ways. They produce seed-bearing fruit, a picture of the woman and the child within her womb. That seed of the woman falls to the ground and dies, but comes back in new life, producing a multiplication of food no less miraculous than the loaves and fishes, though stretched across a greater span of time. The cross is a man-made tree, and Christ stakes his life to it, just as Abraham's tent was pitched among the great trees of Mamre. It's the frame and lintel of the doorway, covered in the blood of the Passover lamb, and the door through which Noah and his family are saved. It was God's hands that shut the door, and God's hands that were nailed to the cross. Outside the cold stone walls of the cathedral, the modern domicile has undergone a continuous evolution, becoming more and more similar in form to the human body. Solid stone walls were replaced by skeletal frames of bone-like wood and sinuous steel, wrapped and stuffed with insulating fat, and kept dry with layers of skin, house wrap, clothed in leather-like vinyl siding, raincoats anointed with oil or latex paint, and a waterproof hat of asphalt shingles. New homes have not only complex temperature regulating respiratory systems in the form of HVAC lungs, but liquid circulatory systems, electrical nervous systems, and fiber optic lines that send and receive the light of information to the eyes and ears within the home. The narrative of God's dwelling places within the Bible is very modest. He lived in a tent when the Israelites lived in tents. When they settled down, he had a home. And when they went into exile, he abandoned his temple, Ezekiel 10. But he never abandoned his people. The incarnation tells the story of God descending to the most modest of dwellings, his mother's womb, the frail body of an infant, the clothes and dwelling of livestock, and the place where fodder is laid. All this in a humble town, in a humble nation, far from the grandeur of Rome, Athens, Egypt, or Babylon. He lived as a stranger in exile and resided in small towns on both sides of Israel and Judah. He slept on the ground in the wilderness and in a boat at sea, on the sea. He ate in the houses of the despised and performed the dirtiest and most menial tasks of a slave. He put himself on display in a place of public shame and humiliation, in the square, through the streets, and on a cross, and resided for 3 days in the grave. Every place that a downtrodden, cursed, and despised are forced to dwell was once occupied by Christ. Yet the places we most often encounter reminders of his presence bears the most similarity to his tomb, the only place he will not return to. Of course, the greatest revelation of Christ's message was that after his ascent to heaven, the dwelling place of God became the bodies of those in whom his Holy Spirit resides. So while there is a value in preserving and keeping the traditions of the cathedrals for all they do represent, the central role of architecture is to provide the arena for the flourishing of humans. The kitchen and the dining table, the bridal chamber, the nursery and the workshop should all be seen as sacred spaces because they are the places where the Spirit of the Lord is found. If the cathedral was serving its highest purpose, it would be more than the place where a large mass of individuals meet. It would be where families, households, neighborhoods, villages, tribes, and nations would find their point of unity, a fractal microcosm of the vision of St. John. Quote, "After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, 'Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb.'" Revelation 7, 9 through 10. The collected assembly is not simply a mass of individuals, but an assembly of groups, nations, tribes, people, and languages. These groups are not arranged hierarchically, but qualitatively. Each individual may overlap with different groups within those categories. I am part of a common nation with everyone else in the United States and with the people in my state. I have commonality with others who have lived here or who live in other states I am familiar with. My tribes could be those who share my theological views, political views, or who prefer Star Trek to Star Wars, and definitely those who root for the Red Sox. Yankees fans cannot be part of my tribe, but they can be part of my people, like the many Italian Americans from New York, or the evangelicals who know what it's like to live in the post-Christian environment of the Northeast. Like many Americans, the only language I speak fluently is English, but that unites me with many people in many places, and the smattering of Spanish I can contribute to my neighbors' limited English brings us into greater unity. In the vision above, these different aspects of culture are no longer points of contention, as everyone is united by their higher purpose of worship. Yet in many other scenarios, these differences in tribe and tongue can result in severe disagreements and even violence. The vision indicates that people can be united despite such differences, and the microcosms of healthy communities that have existed at various times and places prove the point. The idea that different groups of people cannot live together due to their essential nature is false, yet it continuously arises as conflicts emerge at various levels of culture and society. At this current moment, the emphasis on the incompatibility of various people groups is gaining more popularity. This is happening in response to an attempt to force integration at every level of culture. Men are invading the spaces of women, adults are violating the safety of children, the state is inserting politics and cultish practices into the family, and foreign immigrants are being brought in at volumes and concentrations too great to integrate into the existing fabric of society. In response, certain cultural groups are being given permission to exclude on seemingly arbitrary terms, while others are being forbidden from uniting. Pride in deviant sexual identity is culturally ascendant. Pride in traditional family is condemned. Pride in African heritage is ascendant, while pride in European descent is condemned. An important question to ask is where these conflicts are happening. Do we see them in our own neighborhoods, local businesses, or public parks? Perhaps sometimes, but not to the scale that would cause us to seek the elimination of our neighbors. They are much more common in urban environments than suburban and rural, but they are most prevalent of all online, both in digital exchanges and as news witnessed in concentrated form through the lens of algorithmic social media. What causes the same groups to live in harmony in one scenario and antagonism in another? Far more than we realize, the answer is found in architecture. All right, I will read that for a sec. See if anybody's chatting in the comments. Castles have dungeons. Yes, you need you need to have prisoners so that you can visit prisoners. That's what in that parable where Jesus talks about. Living rooms greater than castles, or are they the castle of the family? Well, the castle is, that's your whole house. The castle has all the rooms. That's the good thing about it. Like it's not a singular space. It's like a cell. It's got it's irreducibly complex. So PVK is the pastor of the dark web. He is adjacent in a winsome way with San Fran culture. Okay. I always try to point at both sides in all this stuff. So if I am on one side at one part of the chapter, I'm sure I'll be on the other side at another. You can see this evangelistic coffee mug when you drink it. I guess I'm going to drink this way. You can see it says The Chosen, which is where my mom buys all of her Christmas gifts for everybody. So I'm sure I'll have some new swag from there coming soon. All right, get back to it. And anybody can come in at any point if they want, and I will gladly talk to you. Because I'm just going to edit this later to get the reading parts. The timeless way of building. It's incredibly important to keep the overarching vision in the forefront of our imagination, yet to do so requires incredible humility. No one starts life with a grand vision and the means to carry it out. We start in the center of a family and a community, and we have to discover the nature of our environment from the middle out. Anytime an individual or group has gained sufficient power over their environments and culture to do as they wish, they start reshaping things in an image that serves their preference. Consider the Caesars, both famous and infamous. Each one sought to put his own unique mark on the culture and history of the empire. More often than not, this desire to reshape the world resulted in wars, massacres, famines, plagues, and economic depression. None of them had enough foresight to consider all the possible outcomes of their actions. This is also true of the disastrous plans of fascist and communist leaders in the 20th century. The few places not marked with memorials to the tragedies of failed ideological movements are filled with monuments to impractical central planning. Yet, on the other side of this equation, we find the ramshackle ghettos and degenerate poverty of the third world, usually with a few of those giant centrally planned monstrosities in their capitals. Culture repeatedly oscillates between cycles of short-sighted destruction and delusional utopian visions. Yet in between the trash heaps and monuments, pleasant areas emerge and endure. These are the kinds of places that we love to visit on vacation, where the natives are always happy and we are refreshed by participating in the simple rhythms of normal life. These places are characteristic of what Christopher Alexander calls the timeless way of building. It's not about achieving a particular aesthetic style, but about finding the correct balance between form and context. This goes beyond the idea that there is a trade-off between form and function. That dichotomy usually results in pitting utilitarian ideas against vaguely held notions of tradition. We understand the why of function, but we are left with no answers about the form. The utilitarian approach is native to many inventions of modernity, and adornment or aesthetic may only detract from certain designs. But in many other cases, it may be that a certain amount of superfluous adornment is absolutely necessary to find the proper fit. Footnote: a great example I have often contemplated is in the form of electric guitars. Many cheap brands seek to produce copies based on the classic designs of Gibson and Fender, but to avoid lawsuits, they simply change a few details and dimensions. They almost always look awkward and contrived. They have a fakeness about them. But a few brands have been able to consistently apply an aesthetic theme that helps their model emerge as something new. The Ibanez RGs and the ESP Eclipse are clearly recognizable as influenced by Stratocasters and Les Pauls, but they have enough of their own elements to stand apart as something different. They reflect aesthetically the advancement in function that came from decades of innovation in materials and manufacturing. End footnote. In his book, A Pattern Language, Alexander begins by casting a vision that is sufficiently great to give us direction, while allowing the freedom to progress through whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. Quote, "We begin with that part of the language which defines a town or community. These patterns can never be designed or built in one fell swoop, but patient piecemeal growth, designed in such a way that every individual act is always helping to create or generate these larger global patterns, will slowly and surely, over the years, make a community that has these global patterns in it." As he begins to describe the patterns that make up this language of architecture, he starts on the grandest scale with the first pattern called independent regions. These regions are something akin to nations, though the author makes a distinction from the current set of nation states. Quote, "Metropolitan regions will not come to balance until each one is small and autonomous enough to be an independent sphere of culture. There are four separate arguments which have led us to this conclusion. 1, the nature and limits of human government. 2, equity among regions in a world community. 3, regional planning considerations. And 4, support for the intensity and diversity of human cultures." End quote. I think he expounds on the reasons behind this, things which have been articulated other places and in other ways throughout this book. Quote, "It is not hard to see why the government of a region becomes less and less manageable with size. In a population of n persons, there are of the order of n squared person-to-person links needed to keep channels of communication open. Naturally, when n goes beyond a certain limit, the channels of communication needed for democracy and justice and information are simply too clogged and too complex. Bureaucracy overwhelms human processes. And of course, as n grows, the number of levels in the hierarchy of government increases too. In small countries like Denmark, there are so few levels that any private citizen can have access to the Minister of Education. But this kind of direct access is quite impossible in larger countries like England or the United States. There are many practical considerations for trying to solve these problems. Unless the regions have the power to be self-governing, they will not be able to solve their own environmental problems. The arbitrary lines of states and countries, which often cut across natural regional boundaries, make it all but impossible for people to solve regional problems in a direct and humanly efficient way. He also identifies the current pattern that stands in opposition to so much of humanity's natural desire to flourish, namely the urban monoculture. Quote, finally, unless the present-day great nations have their power greatly decentralized, the beautiful and differentiated languages, cultures, customs, and ways of life of the Earth's people, vital to the health of the planet, will vanish. In short, we believe that independent regions are the natural receptacles for language, culture, customs, economy, and laws, and that each region should be separate and independent enough to maintain the strength and vigor of its culture. The fact that human cultures within a city can only flourish when they are at least partly separated from neighboring cultures is discussed in great detail in Mosaic of Subcultures. We are suggesting here that the same argument also applies to regions, that the regions of the earth must also keep their distance and their dignity in order to survive as cultures. In the best of medieval times, the cities performed this function. They provided permanent and intense spheres of cultural influence, variety, and economic exchange. They were great communes whose citizens were co-members, each with some say in the city's destiny. We believe that the independent region can become the modern polis, the new commune, that human entity which provides the sphere of culture, language, laws, services, economic exchange, variety, which the old walled cities or the polis provided for its members. In other words, a paradise, but not just one, I think this is my part, but 1,000 different independent regions of 2 to 10 million people to replace the current 195 recognized countries. Okay, I guess this is still a quote. In such a balanced system, the aggression of any one region towards another would mean incurring the wrath of 998 adjacent regions. It wouldn't mean the end of war, but it would probably mean the end of world wars. Bringing the vision down to scale. Like all utopian visions, it sounds good on paper. Of course, as stated above, these patterns can never be designed or built in one fell swoop, but patient piecemeal growth designed in such a way that every individual act is always helping to create or generate these larger global patterns will, slowly and surely over the years, make a community that has these global patterns in it. No nation or empire is going to base their plan for world domination on the pie-in-the-sky ideas of one quirky architect. But the beauty is that the patterns scale all the way down to the chairs and tables in front of us. By embracing the timeless way of building, our rooms, our homes, and neighborhoods will begin to facilitate growth towards the kind of world we desire for our children and grandchildren. Architecture alone cannot do this, as culture and habits are vital, but it is an important aspect and one often overlooked. Having the vision, even if we can never see it take place, is crucial for how we live. Alexander, though he roots in his presuppositions in nature rather than revelation, ends up stumbling upon the same pattern revealed in the Bible. The bookends of Genesis and Revelation both share a vision of an ordered cosmos, the garden of God, first limited to Eden and then filling the whole earth. I'm checking the printed book because I think checking my printed book because when I change it from this vertical orientation to the horizontal one, it messes up all the block quotes, and I can't, since there's no quotation marks, I can't tell what parts are mine and which parts are something else. So, okay, so this will make it easier then. Bringing the vision down to scale. No, okay, I read that page. All right. The vision of 1,000 independent regions living in harmony is too far out for us to comprehend. But that vision can sustain us as we begin to transform our trash heaps into gardens and cities. The vision becomes plausible because it can also speak to the smallest environments. As an example, the introduction describes the design of a seating areas based on pattern 167, 6-foot balcony, which contains the following wisdom. Balconies and porches which are less than 6 feet deep are hardly ever used. Balconies and porches are often made very small to save money, but when they are too small, they might just as well not be there. A balcony is first used properly when there is enough room for 2 or 3 people to sit in a small group with room to stretch their legs and room for a small table where they can set down glasses, cups, and the newspaper. No balcony works if it is so narrow that people have to sit in a row facing outward. The critical size is hard to determine, but it is at least 6 feet. Our observations make it clear that the difference between deep balconies and those which are not deep enough is simply astonishing. In our experience, almost no balconies at all, which are 3 or 4 feet deep, manage to gather life to them or get used, and almost no balconies which are more than 6 feet deep are not used. The drawing, which I have reproduced here, shows why. A 6-foot deep porch or balcony can accommodate a small cafe table and enough chairs for 2 or 4 people to easily have a conversation. This design element is rooted not merely in human nature, but human biology. Our size and the proximity in which we feel comfortable and at ease means that a certain spatial arena is a prerequisite for fruitful conversation. The pattern contains other considerations, such as enclosure and being recessed, that can make a space more or less ideal. But just consider the difference between neighborhoods where people are more apt to sit outside while drinking coffee or reading versus those that require all activities to happen indoors. In the first, neighbors may gradually begin to recognize each other, while in the other, people could go months and years without seeing a single soul. The fractal nature of these patterns is present at every level. Those that require the approval of state governors, city planners, and town councils may be more difficult to adopt. But if the influence of these ideas can emerge outward, starting from individual homes and neighborhoods, they may eventually gain enough cachet to inspire the design of future villages, towns, and cities. But we can explore the scale on lower levels as well. A 6-foot balcony may be a fine place to read a book, but nothing will incentivize a person to go outside and read the book that they want more than a book they want to read. Remarkably, Alexander implemented his design principles into his books themselves. A pattern language has an internal system to help construct vocabularies of patterns to understand their purpose and how they interact. Quote, for convenience and clarity, each pattern has the same format. First, there is a picture, which shows an archetypal example of that pattern. Second, after the picture, each pattern has an introductory paragraph, which sets the context for the pattern by explaining how it helps to complete certain larger patterns. Then there are 3 diamonds to mark the beginning of the problem. After the diamonds, there is a headline in bold type. This headline gives the essence of the problem in 1 or 2 sentences. After the headline comes the body of the problem. This is the longest section. It describes the empirical background of the pattern, the evidence for its validity, the range of different ways the pattern can be manifested in a building, and so on. Then, again, in bold type, like the headline, is the solution, the heart of the pattern, which describes the field of physical and social relationships which are required to solve the stated problem in the stated context. This solution is always stated in the form of an instruction, so that you know exactly what you need to do to build the pattern. Then, after the solution, there is a diagram which shows the solution in the form of a diagram with labels to indicate its main components. After the diagram, another 3 diamonds to show that the main body of the pattern is finished. And finally, after the diamonds, there is a paragraph which ties the pattern to all those smaller patterns in the language which are needed to complete this pattern, to embellish it, to fill it out. This thoughtful approach to editing, which I have set out to emulate in this volume, although it doesn't show up on the screen, but it is in the printed version, makes the book eminently more useful. It recognizes a book as an arenic context, a vehicle for conveying information. If it is laid out in a way that repulses the reader, bores them, or makes their eyes hurt from bad layout and tiny text, it doesn't matter how great the information contained within may be. It's a failure in executing its purpose to convey knowledge from the page to the reader. In his other volume, The Timeless Way of Building, Alexander employs a similar yet different fractal pattern. The book is designed with many paragraphs written in italics. These form the core principles of the volume, and the plain text expounds on the ideas, providing examples in context. The brief statement on reading this book makes the purpose clear. Quote, what lies in this book is perhaps more important as a whole than in its details. If you only have an hour to spend on it, it makes much more sense to read the whole book roughly in that hour than to read only the first 2 chapters in detail. For this reason, I have arranged each chapter in such a way that you can read the whole chapter in a couple of minutes simply by reading the headlines which are in italics. If you read the beginning and end of every chapter and the italic headlines that lie between them, turning the page almost as fast as you can, you will be able to get the overall structure of the book in less than an hour. Then, if you want to go into detail, you will know where to go, but always in the context of the whole. Hearing about this novel approach to writing was one of the things that intrigued me enough to pick up a copy. When I began reading, I discovered an even more compressed fractal of this whole in the detailed table of contents, a 7-page section that contains the epigraph of each chapter, a single paragraph that summarizes the whole, and when placed among the others, forms a coherent image of the entire book that can be read in a few minutes. The kernel of the way. Let's check. One person's watching. PPK stream doesn't start for a little while, right? Anyway. The kernel of the way. Interestingly enough, the main sections of the book are the timeless way, the quality, the gate, the way, and the kernel of the way. For someone steeped in the words of Jesus, these words will stand out immediately. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. John 10:19 NIV. Many translations say door, but gate is an appropriate word in the parlance of our day, especially as it refers to pasture. Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. John 14:6. The other aspects of this timeless way also reflect the nature of Christ, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Hebrews 13:8. While the quality reflects the essential nature or spirit of the way. The description of Alexander's quality is one that is very similar in nature to Christ. It is of the same essential nature, the spirit of Christ. The spaces created with this quality allow the inhabitation of eleutheria, libertas, true freedom. Throughout the many volumes, Alexander seeks to capture what the essential nature of these freedom-filled spaces is. It is in the last chapter of The Timeless Way of Knowing that he finally attempts to articulate the paradox. It's hard to imagine that this final teaching, referred to as the kernel of the way, can refer to anything besides the words Jesus, speaking in reference to his impending crucifixion. Very truly, I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. John 12:24. Quote, it may seem as though the life of buildings and the timeless character they have when they are living can be created simply by the use of pattern languages. If the people have a living language, it seems that what emerges from their acts of building will be alive. It seems as though the life of towns can be created simply by the use of languages. And yet, we wonder, can it be so simple? Can any process really generate the nameless quality which stirs the heart of nature? Can any theory be so powerful? These doubts are right. There is a kernel at the center of the timeless way, a central teaching, which I have not described till now. The essence of this kernel is the fact that we can only make a building live when we are egoless. Imagine, for example, blue tiles, white fountains, birds' nests under the arcades, yellow paint, fresh scrubbed woodwork, ornaments around the edge of the roof, red flowers in bushes round the entrance, great windows filled with cushions, flower pots where seedlings are growing, and a broom hanging on the wall, pinnacles high in the sky, the vaults of the building catching the light of the sun, deep shadows in the alcoves around the building edge. The beauty of this place, the quality which touches us, the thing which makes it live, is, above all, that it is carefree, that it is innocent. This innocence will only come about when people honestly forget themselves. It goes without saying that the vast steel and glass and concrete structures of our famous architects do not have this quality. It goes without saying that the mass-produced development houses built by big developers do not have this quality. But it is true that even the more natural architects like Frank Lloyd Wright and Alvar Aalto also do not reach this quality. And it is also true that the funky, relaxed, hippie-style architecture with irregular redwood facades and old-fashioned country-style interiors also does not reach this quality. These places are not innocent and cannot reach the quality without a name because they are made with an outward glance. The people who make them the way they do because they are trying to convey something, some image to the world outside. Even when they are made to seem natural, even their naturalness is calculated. It is, in the end, a pose. Reading these words, it's not hard to see why Alexander, who was a practicing Catholic, leaned towards deism in his beliefs. The church's greatest tool of propaganda, the grandeur of the cathedral, was laid bare in all its inadequacies and lies before the gaze of the observant architect. What he saw was that the buildings designed and crafted by the architects of the church were pale and lifeless reflections of the spaces created by the hands of the true architect. While he makes many references to the science of the day, how could he not, as an academic? It's plain that the certain arguments of the materialist also fell flat before his gaze. Those who would call the order of the cathedral an artificial construct, in contrast to the random chaos of nature, would sound just as foolish. The cathedral was the child's imitation of his father's handiwork. But even the poorest work of art is a masterpiece in the eyes of the Father when it is created out of love. While measurements and ratios may tell us things about the genius of an architect or the skills of the craftsman, the things that would have moved Alexander, the student of architecture, fell flat in comparison to the quality that moved Alexander, the human, made in the image of God. The sensitive spirit is moved most greatly by that quality of innocence. It is found and felt easily in some chapels and cathedrals, while lacking in many more. How then does a builder achieve this timeless quality? That essence is found in the kenotic quality of Christ, the egoless impulse that emptied himself of the status of divinity. Philippians 2. This is how the true church is built. Not the church building, because a building is nothing if it is not alive, filled with the Spirit. The church is the bride of Christ. Like Eve, she is built, bana, from the substance of her husband. The kernel of Christ's church is the blood that he pours out, emptying himself on the cross. The quality of timeless building is self-sacrificial love. The physical structures built out of a reciprocal love reflect this in their essence. The builders of the pyramids could not let go of their ego. They built something that they thought would glorify their memory forever. While their functionless buildings remain, we have no idea who they truly were or why they invested so much in producing their colossal works. The Caesars circled the known world with roads and walls and aqueducts to circulate the image of Caesar on silver coins and Stoic legions. The remnants of the empire are now maintained by the descendants of their conquered foes, who value the preservation of truth. But to bear the name of Rome or Caesar carries no weight in our world, for whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Matthew 16:25. Alexander reflects on this kenosis of ego and what it costs to build something that truly lasts. Quote, to make a building egoless like this, the builder must let go of all his willful images and start with a void. Architects sometimes say that in order to design a building, you must have an image to start with, so as to give coherence and order to the whole. But you can never create a natural thing in this state of mind. If you have an idea and try to add the patterns to it, the idea controls, distorts, makes artificial the work which the patterns themselves are trying to do in your mind. Instead, you must start with nothing in your mind. You are able to do this only when you no longer fear that nothing will happen, and you can therefore afford to let go of your images. At first, when you are still unsure that a pattern language will genuinely generate forms inside your mind, you hang on tight to all the images you have, because you are afraid that without them, there may be nothing left. Once you learn that the pattern language and the sight together will genuinely generate form inside your mind from nothing, you can trust yourself to let go of your images entirely. End quote. Several topics we have discussed earlier should jump out immediately. What is the role of images? If the image is necessary to our creation, what is made will only be an idol. The image and the idea must be sacrificed. If what we want to see cannot be questioned, it is already an idol in our mind. I once had an image in my mind that had become an idol. It was a beautiful image of a wedding, with myself as the groom, and standing in front of me what appeared to be a beautiful woman. Over the years, I tried to fit the face of many girls in that image. Some girls I knew well, others simply glanced across a college campus. Yet the image could never truly coalesce. There was nothing wrong with any of their faces, but they could never fit within that image. It was not because I had not found the right face yet, the proverbial one. The problem was with the image itself. The woman that stood before me in the image, in my mind, had no substance of her own. She was a projection of my own insecurity, a reflection of my ego. This was a woman who would tell me things I wished were true about myself, so I could start to believe them. A woman who would make others view me with admiration and respect, so I could believe it was true. A woman that would fulfill my hedonistic desires free of guilt. A woman I thought I deserved for my faithful service to God. The problem was that no such woman exists, and if I had succeeded in convincing someone to try to fit that image, their inability to do so would have resulted in misery for us both. In the process of Christ building me into the structure of his kingdom, he asked me to let go of this image. I protested because marriage and family are wonderful things, still very much necessary for the plans of God. I protested because I was afraid of facing the question of what was wrong with me, instead of projecting my failures onto others. My plans had to be replaced with the void. As a philosophy, this statement sounds more like something from the East. Emptiness is the goal of certain strands of Buddhism, but the goal here is to build. The void precedes the creation of something new, the tohu wabohu of Genesis. That verse has come to take on a mournful aspect as I have continued to contemplate it. The Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters, like the dove circling the ark of Noah, looking for a place to land, but finding no rest. What we know of the second earth, which emerges after the deluge, we can infer of the first. The world is dead. Theological dogmatists will insist that the substance of creation came to be ex nihilo, out of nothing. Perhaps this is so, but it begs the question, where did the nothing come from? If we follow the pattern of subsequent creations, man from the earth, woman out of man, seed out of fruit, and the child out of the woman, we would be led to believe that the first act of creation, the creation of the something we call matter, comes out of a void, a wound in the side of the Creator. Footnote. This idea is present in Jewish mysticism through the figure of Adam Kadmon, the primordial man, who is the form, if not the substance, of the material cosmos. Judaism seeks a hard distinction between the heavenly and earthly man, the result of Gnostic influences in their mystical tradition. Death seems to be a necessary component of such creation and mirrors the imagery of other creation myths, such as the Enuma Elish, which conflates the waters of chaos with the goddess Tiamat, a dragon whose corpse is used to create the heavens and the earth. And footnote. Since he who saves already existed, it was necessary that he who would be saved should come into existence, that the one who saves should not exist in vain. Footnote. Quote from Irenaeus Against Heresies, translated by Father John Bear. Perhaps it is the influence of philosophy from the Far East, but Eastern Christian thinkers have delved more deeply into these paradoxes, trusting the supremacy of Scripture over the ideas of Plato and Aristotle. They have wrestled with the doctrine of creation more fruitful than my own traditions. Father Aidan Kimmel articulates many of the same ideas quite well. Quote, few have ever concluded that because Jesus died on a cross for the sins of the world, therefore God had to bring humanity into existence. Otherwise, there would be no Savior. Redemption belongs to the act of divine creation. Because Jesus, therefore Adam, the logic turns our heads upside down. Referencing the passages of Revelations 13:8, Colossians 1:13 through 17, and John 8 through 58, he continues, How is the lamb slain from the foundation of the world when the crucifixion took place in AD 33? How can St. Paul say that the world is created through and by the man Jesus? What does the Son of God mean when he declares that he existed before his birth, before Abraham, before Adam? The mysteries of the cross, writes Father George Florovsky, begins in eternity, in the sanctuary of the Holy Trinity, unapproachable for creatures. What precedes the stuff of creation is the death of a body, the substance of a life emptied out. Strangely, this corpse is the body of Christ, God himself, and just as in the case of Lazarus, he brings it back to life through an act of speech, the language of creation, and this language is a gift he gives to humanity. As Alexander writes, for a person who is unfree, the language seems like mere information, because he feels that he must be in control, that he must inject the creative impulse, that he must supply the image which controls the design. But once a person can relax and let the forces in the situation act through him as if he were a medium, then he sees that the language, with very little help, is able to do almost all the work, and that the building shapes itself. This is the importance of the void. A person who is free and egoless starts with a void and lets the language generate the necessary forms out of this void. He overcomes the need to hold onto an image, the need to control the design, and he is comfortable with the void and confident that the laws of nature, formulated as patterns, acting in his mind, will together create all that is required. At this stage, the building's life will come directly from your language. A man who is not afraid to die is free to live because he is open to what happens next and is not always killing it by trying to control it. In my own life, when the idolatrous nature of the image in my mind was made clear, I had to let it go. I was not the creator of the universe or the author of my own life. When I began to listen to the one who was, I realized that if a life of singleness and solitude was his greatest plan for me, then to get my own way would result in misery. To save my life, I had to let go of it. Alongside emptying the vision of the future I had constructed, I had to create a new life to live. I did this through the language provided to me. I spoke the words of Christ, asking that not my will, but yours be done. I contemplated the possibilities of a life alone and articulated the logical argument that I would truly be better off without a wife and family if that was God's greatest vision for my future. In time, these words constructed an inward reality that was at peace with an unknown future. While my desire for a family was still there, I could accept the possibility of life without. To my surprise, it happened that at a certain point, God spoke very clearly that this was not his ultimate plan for my life. Through the span of a few months, circumstances conspired to bring me into a relationship with my future wife, a longtime friend who didn't quite fit the old image I created. When she asked me why I was suddenly interested in her, I told her, the purpose of life is serving others, and you are the one God wants me to serve. Looking back, I can see that the house built by my own ego, if it had come to be, would have been a disaster. Like a house with a bad foundation, any marriage that began under those circumstances would have forced myself and any spouse into painful and fruitless conflict, resulting in divorce or worse. Now we are building a fruitful life together. It is far from easy. There is still more friction than I would like, but that friction is a reflection of what we are becoming. Imperfect structures, flawed foundations, placed under the care of a master builder, one who makes all things new and everything beautiful in its time. This timeless way of building is gradually transforming us into exactly what the wise architect wishes to build. And that's the end of the chapter. And there are 3 people watching. So I will remove this. If anybody wants to chat for a few minutes or whatever, that's cool. I'm not going to start another chapter because I don't have that much time. And actually, let me see. I want to see if that other thing works now. No, did it not? Did it not go in there? Maybe because I closed the window, it didn't finish loading the video I was trying to upload. There is other cool things here. There are these mind maps you can make, and it's kind of hard to see. Let me see here. Zoom in. Oh, okay. There we go. I don't know if anyone else can see this, but nope. That wasn't what I wanted it to do. This is like another one that it made that anyway, let's see. Okay. Cultural renewal framework. Principles, decline, and restoration. So let's see. Cultural decline and virtue crises. I don't want it to do that. I don't know how to use this app. I'm just learning it. Erosion of core values. Shift from excellence to materialism, wealth and status, failure to value the family itself, modern pursuit of personal peace and affluence, focus on happiness and non-judgment, that's boomorality, errors regarding innate human goodness, generational identity shifts, sincerity to proflicity, the crisis of fathering and parental guidance. So that's the cultural decline and virtue crisis. Philosophical and spiritual foundations, defining the ultimate aim, telos, cultural telos, the city of God, opposing spirits, mammon and Darwinism, agents, arenas, and home sovereignty, defining agentic and arenic roles. The home tent/domicile is the sovereign cultural base. That's all good. Principle of adaptability, tents before temples. Materialism and economics. Economic systems are fundamentally faith-based, and the problem of covetousness, mimetic desire, lasting value versus monetary price, love of gain, philargria as root of evil, productive property and housing, importance of owning productive property, and the critique of urban status costs. That's good. Narratives, archetypes, and symbols. Discovering truth through story logic, the gestalt, the power of shared mythology and fantasy, symbolism in cultural practices, hospitality, clothing, and food, and practical solutions and restoration. Vocation and education, tectonic school model, targeting young men for trades and calling, goal, community and church revitalization. Restoration of marriage and family life, building community structure, Alexander's patterns and third places, which we just read about, rhythms of celebration, feasts, and 2-day weekends. Cool. Well, I'm going to put this. No, I don't need that. All right. Remove that. All right. I'm going to play this video.
Hey, everyone, and welcome. Today, we are diving deep into an idea from Michael Sartori's Tents Before Temples that I think is absolutely fascinating. It's this question: what makes a story feel true? We're going to unpack the hidden logic that makes some stories, even the totally made-up ones, stick with us and feel so incredibly real.
You know, it really all starts with this one simple, powerful rule from an old Hollywood writer. Give the audience someone to root for. It's so simple, right? But it's everything. When we connect with a character, when we see ourselves in their struggles, suddenly the story just lights up. We're invested. But just rooting for someone, that's only the first step. The real question, the one we're really going to wrestle with today, is what makes a story true? And I don't just mean factually accurate, I mean true in a much deeper sense, true to some kind of internal logic that makes it all click.
And that brings us to this idea of story logic. It's the concept that stories aren't just random events. No, they have their own kind of math, their own physics. There are rules that we somehow just get. It's why if you watch a tragedy but someone slaps a comedy label on it, your brain just goes, nope, that feels wrong. So picture it like this. Stories are like these massive natural systems. They flow like a river, right? And that river can branch off into different streams. Maybe one is a comedy, another's a tragedy, but they are all following this logical, almost inevitable course down to the same ocean.
Okay, so if stories have this built-in logic, then what's at the very center of it all? Let's talk about the soul of a story. That unchangeable part, its true essence.
And who better to help us out than Shakespeare? You know the famous line, Juliet gets it. The name of a thing doesn't change what that thing actually is. Sure, Romeo's last name is Montague, but that's just a label. It has nothing to do with who he really is, his soul.
This is just a perfect illustration of that. Look at Romeo and Juliet next to West Side Story. You can swap out the names. Montagues and Capulets become the Sharks and the Jets. You can change the setting from Verona to New York City. But the soul of the story, it's identical. Rival groups, star-crossed lovers, and that heart-wrenching tragic ending. That's why it works. It's a true adaptation.
Now, let's look at the opposite. Let's look at a false adaptation. If you check out these two passages from the Bible, they use weirdly similar language. An invitation, an offering of myrrh. The surface details look the same, but their souls, they couldn't be more different. One is about pure, devoted love. The other is about seduction and destruction. Using the same ingredients to tell a fundamentally opposite story, well, that's not an adaptation, that's a lie.
And that's really the crucial point here. A true adaptation keeps the soul intact. But the moment you change that core truth, that essence, you're not just retelling a story anymore, you're telling a lie. Which brings us right to our next big idea, the magician's lie. Because it turns out, the most powerful and convincing stories we live inside are often just really, really good tricks designed to fool us.
All right, think about any magic trick you've ever seen. They all have three parts. First, there's the pledge. The magician shows you something totally ordinary, like a coin. Second, the turn. He does something amazing with it, makes it vanish. And finally, the prestige. He brings it back and you're blown away. That structure is so important.
So, why does that matter? Because the biggest, most powerful lies in our culture, they follow that exact same pattern. They take a simple, ordinary truth, the pledge, and then they twist it so completely that we start to question what's real. And that, right there, is enchantment. It's a spell that makes us blind to what's right in front of us.
The great C.S. Lewis was all over this. He pointed out how enchantment works by taking objective reality and shrinking it down to just our subjective feelings. You think you're having a deep conversation about a waterfall, but really, you're only talking about your feelings about the waterfall. The reality of the thing itself gets lost.
And here's the trap. This is how they get us. We are often born into the story, or we walk in halfway through, right in the middle of the turn. We never even saw the pledge, that ordinary, simple truth. So we just accept the illusion, the trick, as normal, as reality. So the big question is, how do we break free? How do we wake up from these enchantments? Well, let's take a look at how we can start to see past the spell and find the real truth of things.
I want you to consider the beautiful Japanese art of kintsugi. This is where, when a piece of pottery breaks, they don't throw it away. They meticulously repair it with gold lacquer. And the cracks, they don't hide them, they highlight them. The history of the object, its brokenness, becomes the most beautiful part of its story.
Now, what's the difference between a real kintsugi bowl and some cheap, mass-produced imitation you might find? I mean, they might look similar, but one has a true story. It was actually shattered and it was lovingly restored. The other is just a fake. It's a lie. The difference isn't the appearance, it's the truth of its story.
This leads us to an incredible old Arthurian legend about Sir Gawain. To save King Arthur's life, Gawain has to answer a riddle. What do women most desire? And to get the answer, he has to promise to marry this hideous old woman, the Loathly Lady. He keeps his promise, They get married, and on their wedding night, she reveals she's actually under a curse. She can be beautiful, but not all the time, and she gives Gawain a choice. He can have her beautiful in public for everyone to see, but ugly when they're alone, or ugly in public and beautiful only for him. What a choice, right? What would you even do?
Gawain's answer is brilliant. He doesn't choose. Instead, he turns to her and says, "The choice is yours." He gives her the power, the sovereignty over her own self. And by honoring her true self, her real identity beneath the curse, he breaks the spell completely. She becomes beautiful both day and night. Seeing the truth restored her dignity.
And look, this isn't just some dusty old legend. This same dynamic, this breaking of spells through seeing the truth, it plays out in the real world in some pretty unbelievable ways. Let me show you a modern fairy tale. This is the story of Nick and Lex Rennick. They were both caught in a modern kind of spell, adopting identities that, while bringing them together, also led them down a path of serious harm. But then came the turn, a near-death experience that forced them to question the whole story they were living. And what followed was just a profound transformation. Lex detransitioned, her body healed in ways doctors couldn't explain, and their love was completely reborn. Out of this deeply broken past, they created a brand new, true story for themselves.
Their story, it just perfectly reflects this ancient, deep truth. That real beauty isn't about perfection or avoiding being broken. It's about redemption. It's about how even the most shattered stories, the most cursed situations, can be made beautiful in their time.
So we end right back where we started, but hopefully with a totally new way of seeing things. The world is constantly telling you stories. Stories about who you are, what you should want, what's real. The challenge for all of us then is to learn to look past the surface, to see beyond the spell, and to ask ourselves, which of these stories has a true soul, and which ones are just a beautiful lie?
Well, it was pretty good. That was the first time I saw it. I'm glad they didn't wokeify it or whatever, because it's Google. Well, it doesn't appear anyone. Well, I don't know. Is anybody else going to come on or anything? Probably not. PBK's live stream's probably going to start, right? Is he on today? I'm assuming he is. Maybe if he's not, then I'll do something. But I guess I could just check that out too. Oh, yeah. No live stream for today? Well. Interesting. Maybe people are over at Rigel's. There's the peoples. Well, maybe I'll go check that out. All right. Adios. Wait, what was there more chats? Oh, comments. Oh, what's this? What's the book to my left with the upside down title on the spine? To my left. I don't know. Oh, this one? This. Metamagical Themas by Douglas Hofstadter. I've not read it. but I bought it because it looked cool. I like to buy books even if I don't read them, because sometimes just knowing a book exists inspires you in some interesting way. I haven't read the Higher Order Truths About Chmess. I was talking to Kirk. No. Well, guess that's going to be the end of the stream. Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching.